our video. It is officially a new year, and I'm gonna say what I've said all these years, which is I'm going to be more consistent this year. The goal is to upload. I'm not even going to say the amount of videos that I want to upload. I'd rather just surprise you guys and show you. But I thought today it would be fun to read the first few pages of A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I've actually been hearing a lot of great things about this book, and you guys know, especially if you've been here for a while, that I love to read. And one of my really great friends had the idea for me to read the first few chapters of this book. I don't know if I'll actually read the whole book, mostly because I heard that there's a lot of really smutty scenes, and it's just not appropriate for my ASMR channel, but maybe that can be a thing with books like this that are popular, or maybe I can skip those scenes. But either way, I'm gonna read probably the first 2 chapters for you guys. You know that I love reading to you guys as well, so I think that this will be really nice and fun. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay. This is the map that we are going to use as a reference. Okay. Prithian, Fairy Realms, Mortal Lands, Iron, Mortal Lands, and then different courts. A Court of Thorns and Roses. Okay, let's see. Chapter 1. The forest had become a labyrinth of snow and ice. I'd been monitoring the parameters of the thicket for an hour, and my vantage point in the crook of a tree branch had turned useless. The gusting wind blew thick flurries to sweep away my tracks, but buried along with them any signs of potential quarry. Hunger had brought me farther from home than I usually risked, but winter was the hard time. The animals had pulled in, going deeper into the woods than I could follow, leaving me to pick off stragglers one by one, praying they'd last until spring. They hadn't. I wiped my numb fingers over my eyes, brushing away the flakes clinging to my lashes. Here there were no telltale trees, stripped of bark to mark the deer's passing. They hadn't yet moved on. They would remain until the bark ran out, then travel north past the wolf's territory and perhaps into the fairy lands of Prithian, where no mortals would dare go, not unless they had a death wish. A shudder skittered down my spine at the thought, and I shoved it away, focusing on my surroundings, on the task ahead. That was all I could do, all I'd been able to do for years. Focus on surviving the week, the day, the hour ahead. And now with the snow, I'd be lucky to spot anything, especially from my position up in the tree, scarcely able to see 15 feet ahead. Stifling a groan as my stiff limbs protested at the movement, I unstrung my bow before easing off the tree. The icy snow crunched under my fraying boots, and I ground my teeth. Low visibility, unnecessary noise. I was well on my way yet to another fruitless hunt. Only a few hours of daylight remained. If I didn't leave soon, I'd have to navigate my way home in the dark, and the warnings of the town hunters still rang fresh in my mind. Giant wolves were on the prowl, and in numbers. Not to mention whispers of strange folk spotted in the area, tall and eerie and deadly. Anything but fairies the hunters had besieged our long-forgotten gods, and I had secretly prayed alongside them. In the 8 years we'd been living in our village, 2 days' journey from the immortal border of Prithian, we'd been spared an attack, though traveling peddlers sometimes brought stories of distant border towns left in splinters and bones and ashes. These accounts, once rare enough to be dismissed by the village elders as hearsay, had in recent months become commonplace whispering couch nestled in folds of emerald silk. Once I dreamed and breathed in thought and color and light and shape. Sometimes I would even indulge in envisioning a day when my sisters were married and it was only me and father with enough food to go around, enough money to buy some paint, and enough time to put these colors and shapes down on paper or canvas or the cottage walls. Not likely to happen anytime soon, perhaps ever. So I was left with moments like this, admiring the glint of pale winter light on snow slaughter and maim and torment. Let him die here and now. I would be glad to end him. The wolf crept closer, and a twig snapped beneath one of his paws, each bigger than my hand. The doe went rigid. She glanced to either side, ears straining towards the gray sky. With the wolf's downwind position, she couldn't see or smell him. His head lowered, and his massive silver body, so perfectly blended into the snow and shadows, sank onto its haunches. The doe was still staring in the wrong direction. I glanced from the doe to the wolf and back again. At least he was alone. At least I'd been spared that much. But if the wolf scared the doe off, I was left with nothing but a starving, oversized wolf, possibly a fairy, looking for the next best meal. And if he killed her, destroying precious amounts of hide and fat, if I judged wrongly, my life wasn't the only one that would be lost. But my life had been reduced to nothing but risks these past 8 years that I'd been hunting in the woods, and I'd picked correctly most of the time. Most of the time. The wolf shot from the brush in a flash of gray and white and black, his yellow fangs gleaming. He was even more gargantuan in the open, a marvel of muscle and speed and brute strength. The doe did not stand a chance. I fired the ash arrow before he destroyed much else of her. The arrow found its mark in his side, and I could have sworn the ground itself shuddered. He barked in pain, releasing the doe's neck as his blood sprayed on the snow, so ruby bright. He whirled toward me, those yellow eyes wide, hackles raised. His low growl reverberated in the empty pit of my stomach as I surged to my feet, snow churning around me, another arrow drawn. But the wolf merely looked at me, his maw stained with blood, my ash arrow protruding so vulgarly from his side. The snow began falling again. He looked, and with a sort of awareness and surprise that made me fire the second arrow, just in case that intelligence was of the immortal wicked sort. He didn't try to dodge the arrow as it went clean through his wide yellow eye. He collapsed to the ground. Color and darkness whirled, eddying in my vision, mixing with the snow. His legs were twitching as a low whine sliced through the wind. Impossible. He should be dead, not dying. The arrow was through his eye, almost to the goose fletching. But wolf or fairy, it didn't matter. Not with that ash arrow buried in his side. He would be dead soon enough. Still, my hand shook as I brushed off snow and edged closer, still keeping a good distance. Blood gushed from the wounds I'd given him, staining the snow crimson. He pawed at the ground, his breathing already shallow. Was he in much pain, or was his whimper just his attempt to shove death away? I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The snow whirled around us. I stared at him until that coat of charcoal and obsidian and ivory ceased, rising and falling. Wolf. Definitely just a wolf, despite his size. The tightness in my chest eased, and I loosed a sigh, my breath clouding in front of me. At least the ash arrow had proved itself to be lethal, regardless of who or what it took down. A rapid examination of the doe told me I could carry only one animal, and even that would be a struggle. But it was a shame to leave the wolf, though most importantly, I hope that you are getting